Good morning, everybody. This is Peter, and today I'm going to talk about single versus multi-family investments and how they differ. Why am I doing this? So I have a real estate investment company, and we help people to break away from to become financially independent through investing in real estate. I go to a lot of events and I talk to people about how we use single family homes as a long-term investment vehicle to generate cash flow. And at almost every event, somebody asks me, they say, Peter, what about apartments? Why do you prefer single family homes versus apartments? And every time I go through my explanation, and this gave me the idea, why don't I do this live? So, jumping right into it, single family single family houses as investment versus apartment buildings and small multifamily houses. How do they differ? Well, first of all, let's level set on what we're going to talk about. I want to go over some terms, and I want to make sure that what I'm thinking is what you're thinking, that we're all on the same page. I'm going to switch to a presentation here for a second. I'm going to talk a little bit about when we say single family investment, what are we talking about? When we say apartment building, what are we talking about? So let me pop on the presentation. Hopefully all of you see this. So I'm going to switch slides. So single family house. What is the perfect single family Class C house looks like? Well, I found this on MLS. I'm using it as an example. It's a one-story, 3-bedroom, 1-bathroom, hopefully brick building, especially if you're in a state like Florida or some other place where hurricanes are common. I like metal roofs. About 1,300 square foot, that's what you'll find. We would like to rent on average for around $900. More is better, less is sometimes acceptable. We want tenant to be paying all of the utilities, and we want tenant to be taking care of grass and all that stuff. Something like that for one of our portfolios, I would be trying to get for around $60,000. Now, what would it look like on an inside? Not the best picture, but it's, again, I just randomly picked a house which is actually for sale, and it's close to where we have 17 houses. It's in the same neighborhood. On the inside, I would expect a kitchen. Probably vinyl countertops, nothing fancy. I really like to have tile flooring throughout the house because it really keeps your turning costs down. So again, it's a Class C, so the type of tenant I would expect to see in this house would be low income or close to that, possibly Section 8 tenant. Now, when we say a Class C multifamily, what would it look like? Again, I found this one just in a listing. This is actually probably one of the nicer Class C 10-unit apartments that I've seen. I would expect the units to be, 2-bedroom, maybe 1-bedroom, 1-bathroom, right around 900 square feet. Average rent for those would be about $700. Why did I pick 700? Because generally in the market where a 3-bedroom house is renting for 900, you would see a two-bedroom apartment renting for about 700. Anything less than that, it's going to be a little more risky. Tenants pay their own electricity. Usually, landlords will pay common utilities, landlords will pay upkeep of the grounds, and landlords will pay for water, sewer, and garbage because none of those would be individually metered for water. Hopefully, they're individually metered for electricity. In some markets, you will be able to pass on the cost among tenants. In others, you will not. The target purchase price for this building, if I were to buy it at 700, I would try and get it for 350,000. We'll talk about, this we'll talk about a little later. So that is what I call a Class C investment. What I'm going to talk about is going to be different for a Class B or Class A type of investment. Again, I'm here to talk about what my opinions are and what I know from the experience about investing in single family homes versus multifamily homes. We own both. We have multiple single-family houses, both in Washington and in Florida. I've done a very serious analysis on single-family homes in Cleveland, in Ohio, in Memphis, and other states. We also own multiple fourplexes. We have several duplexes. We have a 14-unit apartment building. All of them are Class C, and the 14-unit is probably even Class C minus. So we have first-hand experience. But again, what I'm sharing with you is what our beliefs are. This is my opinion. Please don't take that and make investment decisions based on that and then say, hey, Peter, you didn't advise me right. This is not to, I'm not supposed to be advising anybody. I've also noticed that there are two schools of thought which happen to have very strong opinions. Some people really like single-family homes. Some people really like apartments. I'm not here to advocate one way or the other. I personally, I'll disclose that, I prefer single-family homes. Now, we do own small apartment buildings, and if there is the right one that comes along with the right math, absolutely will buy it. It is really important to understand the difference, though. The math is different, the risk profile of the investment is different, the type of tenants you're going to have is going to be very similar, but what that type of tenant will mean for your building is going to be very different. So let's jump into math first. This might be a little bit boring for those of you who don't want to see math, but I want to go through the numbers really quick, because then when I talk about how type of tenant impacts it, it's going to make more sense. So let's take a look at the math. On the left in my table you will see single family rental house times 10. So we don't really buy houses in onesies and twosies anymore. When you're buying something for $60,000, the amount of time and energy you will spend buying, researching, and setting everything up is the same whether you're doing one house or 10 houses. And you will actually get a better deal for property management and for many other things when you're buying in bulk. You will also be able to buy houses at a better price because you're buying in bulk, you're buying wholesale. So I would expect a significant reduction to pricing. So on the left you see the single family houses times 10. We assume the rent is going to be $900 per unit. I usually budget at least 5% vacancy. No property ever stays rented 100% of the time. Never. So there's always going to be a vacancy. In this case, on annual basis, times 10 is going to be $5,400. You can see the numbers. I'm going to go through them really quick. All of the numbers have been for 10 houses. So your effective rent is going to be about $102,000. You will spend about $7,000 in taxes, maybe $4,000 in insurance, plus or minus, depending on how good your contracts. I usually budget 8% for management. Now, management is going to have three components to it. So your management company is going to charge you a percentage of gross rents every month for managing the property. Your management company is going to charge you something, usually between half a month to a full month, when they have to rotate the tenant. Your management company is going to charge you something when they have to come out and do maintenance. And some management companies try and charge you something when they resign the lease. 8% is usually enough to cover the cost of monthly management, and then I budget my rollover costs into the vacancy amount. And you got to understand those are estimates. I usually budget at least 5% for maintenance. Stuff comes up, has to be fixed unless you have a brand new house. 5% is usually enough. Now if you have something that's really rough, you'll have to fix it up at first, but eventually it should get to 5%. And then 5% for capital expenditures. I've seen some operators just budget 10% for maintenance, and the capital expenditures are part of it. But at the end of the day, it's an allowance. You're using it to do your basic analysis. When you actually have the property under contract, you're going to have to do you're going to have to look at actuals. So that gives you a total operating expenses of $30,000. Your net operating income, which is your gross effective rents minus all of the expenses, is thus $72,000, which is about 67% of the gross rents. That's a little high. I usually budget between 65 and 62% depending on where you are. So this portfolio with those math is going to cap at 12.5%. If you were to finance the entire 600 at 6% interest, your interest and principal payment would be about $56,000 a year. So you would be getting $16,000 a month, $16,000 a year in cash flow. That's kind of very simple. It's a divided by 12. You know, it's going to be your $1,300 a month. Let's take a look at the multifamily on the same hand. For this particular example, I took an apartment that I say we're going to try and buy for that is listed for 600. The rents on this, instead of 700 like on the previous page, in this case is going to be 900 a month. I'm just keeping the rents the same to demonstrate the difference in expenses. Again, same vacancy, same effective rent. We are assuming, for the sake of the example, same taxes, same insurance, same management, same maintenance. Now, what not the same is that for an apartment, you will have to pay for the upkeep of the common areas if the building has hallways, stairs, things like that. You will have to pay water, sewer, garbage. You will have to pay common utilities, and you will have to pay somebody to take care of the grounds if you have them. Or if you're in a snow state, you'll have to plow the driveways, mow the lawn, basically do those type of things. It adds another $15,000 in annual income. Now, water, sewer, garbage, $12,000 a year. I assumed $100 per door per month. And that should cover water, sewer, and garbage. In some states, in some communities, might be less, might be more, but it's kind of a good rule of thumb assumption. What that does, it reduces your NOI to $57,000, which gives you a cap rate of only 9.6%. Again, if you were to finance the whole purchase price and you were paying interest and paying principal out on a 30-year amortization basis, it would be $56,000. So your net cash flow would only be $1,600 a year. So 10 times less than on the same portfolio of single-family homes. Now, I did say that apartments make sense, but for this apartment to make sense, you would have to buy it for $476,000 instead of the $600,000. If you can get that price, then this building is definitely worth considering. Now that we talked about the numbers, let's talk about some of the modifiers that make those numbers different. When you're dealing with Class C properties, your average tenant is going to be a low-income tenant. They're probably not going to be super successful in life. They will probably be getting government subsidy of some sort. And I'm trying to be politically correct about it. There is a possibility of maybe some substance abuse. When you take enough of those tenants and you concentrate them in one area, there are certain type of problems that could come up. For example, when we bought our 14-unit apartment building, we had a tenant that was dealing drugs out of her apartment. Took us a while to evict her because she was paying her rent. Because she was dealing drugs out of apartment, we had constant traffic of really undesirable individuals coming and going, and so that caused for the entire apartment building the quality of tenants to go down. Good people moved out, bad people moved in, and so it took us 2 years to turn around that building. It's finally more or less cleaned up, and it's cash flowing closer to what our initial expectations were. Also, when you buy an apartment building for a 10-unit apartment building for $400,000, you will expect it to be old building with possibly cast iron piping, which we did have, and the sewer was leaking. There were cracked sewer pipes. We had sanitary issues with the building, so we had to go and clean that up, and that was unpleasant as well. So some things to consider. Yes, you're only gonna have on a single family portfolio, you're gonna have 10 roofs, 10 sewers to deal with. You're gonna have 10 of everything, and on a single apartment building, you're gonna have one roof, one system of one plumbing system, one electrical system. It might be cheaper to repair one big roof than to do 10 small roofs at the same time, but the good thing about single family homes is that those roofs generally don't fail all at the same time. You might be able to get away with replacing 1 or 2 roofs per year over the course of 5 years. So those are main differences between how the costs for single family versus multifamily work when you buy them as an investment portfolio. Let's take a look at some of the other things I will talk about. So a rule of thumb. I came up with that rule for myself when doing quick analysis on a portfolio or an apartment building. It works in most markets. Again, it's a very rough estimate. It basically tells me if I need to keep looking at a certain asset or if it's way out of the bed. So in a single family, I'll just take gross rents, and if the listing doesn't specify gross rents, I'll guesstimate. But usually for something like this, if the average rent per house was 900 and I was looking at a portfolio of 10 or 15 houses, I would multiply it 900 times 15 times 12 gives me my annual my annual gross rents times 62%. That's my NOI. Then you divide it by whatever cap you want to achieve, and that gives you how much you can pay for it. Same thing on the multifamily, except I'm using 45% versus 62, and that represents high expenses. Now, me personally, and that's my opinion, I believe Class C apartment buildings to be more risky than single family due to higher concentration of maybe low-income tenants and older buildings, and potentially more can go wrong with it. So I would, the way I deal with that, I would expect a higher cap rate. So in the same market, maybe I would be okay with a 12% cap rate for single family homes, but I would want 14 on an apartment building. So one other thing I wanted to talk about today, and that is broker math. I call it. Watch out for broker math. I have, I'm going to jump into the numbers in a second, but when I was preparing this presentation, I went and I looked for some possible examples of portfolios or apartment buildings. And just randomly I came across this portfolio, and they were selling 12 or 13 units for $750,000, and the broker did all the math, and they're like, oh, it's a 16% cap. And I looked at it and I'm like, this doesn't ring true. So I pull out my trusty calculator. This is what I do most of my financial and preliminary financial analysis with. You don't need anything more complex than that. You can have a calculator spreadsheet, and I get into Excel, and I'll spend hours and hours playing with Excel when I'm actually doing deep analysis. But to write an initial offer, this is all I use. And I learn my numbers, and I'm like, yeah, that doesn't look right. So for those of you who are interested in math, here's what it did look like. So the broker did his math, and they basically came up with gross income of $177,000. They've only used taxes, gas, water, and electricity. So tenants pay their own electricity. Landlord pays the electricity for the tenants. So the units are not individually metered. Of $20,000, property management, and they came up with a net operating income of $123,000. For some reason, they didn't subtract insurance from it, even though they quoted it. And they didn't subtract a bunch of other things. So on the right here, I did my own math, and I started with their gross rents. Gross rents are usually accurate in the listings because those numbers are fairly easy to come up with. Most of the other numbers in the listings are either inaccurate because the broker is trying to make the property look better than it really is, or they don't know, and the owner doesn't know. And I'm going to have a quick example on that closer towards the end. So using the same math as before, I came up with a net operating income of $90,000 for the same property. So were you to try and buy it for $750,000, it would actually translate at 12% cap rate, note 16. Now, with that net operating income, if you wanted to buy this was actually a portfolio, and still get it at 16.5 cap, you would have to get it for $550,000, which is a $200,000 reduction. Just wanted to show how broker math can overestimate the value. For most of the portfolios and apartments, to me at least, the value of that asset, and I think of them just that as assets, the value of that asset is a function of its cash flow, with one exception, and I'll talk about it next. But if the cash flow misrepresented, then the value is overestimated, and so you could spend on an asset like that. If I were to consider buying it, I would open up with $500,000, and I would maybe write in my offer that, hey, based on the actual NOI, this is what I think the property is worth. And most of the time, the answer is going to be no, and that's fine. Now, why there is another really strong difference between multi-family asset and a single-family asset, which is a portfolio of single-family homes, and that is the way the banks view them. When you're talking about small multi-families, apartment buildings of 10 plus, the banks will value them based on the income approach. In other words, they will view it the same way. They'll look at what the cap rate is, what the net operating income is, and they'll apply a certain cap to it, and they'll come up with a value. So the only way you can actually change banks' valuation of that is to increase the operating income or reduce your cost. None of those can be done quickly, and there's usually cost associated with it. As you start pushing the rents in a low-income world, you are actually significantly impacting your tenant. And I'll do a quick example. Let's say our house was renting for $900. The Section 8 was paying $700 for it. The tenant was paying $200 for it, right? Now let's assume we're trying to push the rent up by $100. So what just happened is Section 8 is still paying $700 for it, but now the tenant is expected to come up with a difference of $100. So now they're paying $300 where they used to be paying $200. So you just raised their rents, or the rents that they feel they're paying, by 50%. That tenant is most likely going to move out, and the new tenant is going to move in right after. You go into that house, spend a couple of grand making it rent ready again. And one thing about low-income tenants is they're not great at taking care of their places. So don't over-rehab. Clean it up, make it nicer, and then get a new tenant in there as quickly as possible. But it's still gonna, if there was a tenant in there for multiple years before, you're probably gonna spend a couple grand fixing up the property, and they are probably gonna spend 2 months without rent revenues. So that's your cost of rotating. Now, if you're trying to push rents on a portfolio of 50 houses, that cost, and I've done a quick estimate, that cost could easily be about $100,000, $100,000 to $150,000 to significantly push rents on a portfolio of that size. So to raise the value of an apartment building, because the banks are looking at income approach, you have to increase the income or decrease cost, which is usually not fast and cannot be, and there is a cost associated with it. On a portfolio of single family houses, on the other hand, banks first of all, banks won't view them as multifamily assets. They're going to look at them as single-family homes, and they're going to value them based on appraisal. And appraisal is going to be representation of the retail market value of that house. So if you bought it at a 75% discount, or sorry, 25% discount, if you bought it for 75% of the market value, almost immediately you can go and appraise that and actually refinance that property and get most of your down payment out. There is another difference though. Why would it make sense sometimes to buy an apartment building versus a portfolio of single family homes? Again, banks view them differently. For some reason, banks view the portfolio of single family homes is riskier investment than let's say at a 15-unit apartment building. So the type of loan that you can get for those is different. You can get a small bank to finance a small apartment building, and I think right now I've heard people talking about 4%, maybe 4.5%. If you wanted to do 15 single-family homes, you wouldn't do 15 standalone mortgages. That would just be way too expensive, and there are a whole bunch of issues associated with it. You would go to one of the institutional lenders, and you would do it's a semi-commercial loan, but the best interest rate I've seen for those would be starting at maybe low fives, and then between low fives and mid sixes is what you would expect to pay in interest on those. So you're gonna be spending less in operating expenses and a little bit more paying in interest. So that's the difference between how banks view the properties. Now, I have talked about the main difference between single family and multi-family. Our preferred investment vehicle are the single family homes. We will buy multi-families. There are people who are on the completely opposite side of me, and they think that single family portfolios, single family assets are better, and it's okay. This is my opinion, that's theirs. I'm thinking of partnering with one of the operators who believe more strongly in the multi-family side of the business, because a lot of the portfolios that I look at, they are not one or the other, they're a combination. There will be 5 or 6 fourplexes, maybe an 8plex, and then 15 or 20 single family homes. So if we could get together and actually acquire those jointly and then split them by who wants what, and we might achieve some synergies there. But again, whether you invest in single family or multi-family, it doesn't matter. As long as you invest, but you also invest smartly. Real estate investing does not have to be hard if you know what you're doing and if you're doing it right. And it doesn't have to take a lot of your time. But if you're just starting out, partner with somebody who knows what they're doing and can guide you through that process. Also, while it is a passive income, if you want to maximize your returns, it does take time. And so if you don't have sufficient time to spend on investing in on analyzing your portfolio and keeping it up, again, work with somebody who can. So if you have any more questions on this or any other topics that I discussed in this, or if you have a suggestion for next week's transmission, please don't hesitate to reach out. Our contact information, again, is the name of the company is Choice for Homes Investment Solutions. You can reach us by email at info@choiceforhomes.com. You can also call me, and that's my cell phone number, except it's misspelled, should be 425-246-8390. I'll correct that in a second. And then I'm gonna upload this video to our company's YouTube channel. If you find this useful and entertaining, please subscribe and help us drive the traffic to the YouTube channel. Anyway, until next Monday, bye.